Hi and welcome to my next Necromunda scenery video. In this video I'm going to be trying to tackle how I've made a small room that you can use for whatever you fancy. So it could be a road dock, it could be a tavern, it could be any number of things. Now, I now in front of me have one of the Zone Mortalis tiles, which thankfully are back in stock. They've been out of stock for a good couple of months. But what I didn't quite realise was how clever the tiles are to building up your scenery and for a game. So basically it works on a clever rail type system. So each vent is designed to take a column, and then you have next to them these rail sections that are designed to take a wall. So, and these walls sit on nice and snug. You then have got plain sections that don't have any requirement at all. Now, one thing this has highlighted is the fact that, as you can see here, there's quite a big difference in the length of this versus the length and the width of this. That means that you can't get two columns next to each other because it will actually overhang and it won't sit properly. Now that poses a little bit of a challenge because originally I was going to glue a pair of these together for a building. That's not going to work because if you did, it would mean that you're suddenly limited with where you put it. So basically you need something fairly clever, and that won't work either because then it's over a vent. So it's designed so that you're meant to have a column, a pair of walls and another column. Now I think I've got round this. So what I'll do is I'll bring over what I've done and sort of talk you through my thinking. What I've got is I've got two columns that are basically disassembled. They're just stuck together with masking tape at the moment because that's the way I tackle most of my buildings. I've incorporated 6 tiles and it will line up perfectly with the edges. So when we move it, setting up a game, provided we incorporate one vent, we can move it almost anywhere on the board. You can have it cross and whatnot. As you'll see, there's certain bits that don't line up. So what my intention is to cut this angled piece off completely, slice it down. I will then fill this in with plasti-card of some kind. The frontage, I'm going to put a plasti-card lintel basically across, and the back section, one of these bits that I cut off, I'm going to glue in here so that it angles in, and then I'll probably use just a single wall section and glue it up there. Now I need to obviously work out how things will glue together because it's not going to be quite as simple as it sounds. The frontage will vary how you want to do it depending on what type of shop or building you want it to be. So it could be you want just a single door. It could be that you might just want to cut like little slots through for toll booth. You could want the whole thing open with a lean-to. But providing you strap it up and support it with some plasti-card so that you get a solid frame, you'll be fine. The base will be done in the same way as I did my little grub shack, where, here it is, where basically it's just a piece of plasti-card that's raised up so that it will fit on top of a vent without any issues. What we're after doing on this is to cut the whole of this angled piece off here. We need a very square, accurate cut because we want this bit and this bit to be the same. So we're going to actually need some better tools than a ruler and a permanent marker. Firstly, what you need is an engineer's scriber. So this is just a hardened steel tip put into some type of body. This is also fantastic if ever you want to use it for a pilot hole for drilling the hole in a gun barrel. Then you need an engineer's square. Now this is very obvious how it works. So what we need to do is we need to measure here, and that's 7mm. So then you want to measure 7mm here as best you can. It is, after all, a bit of scenery, and that takes it pretty much right up to that edge. So you then line this up. It's quite difficult to do to make sure it's still running shot, etc. And then make sure it's nice and square on that. You draw your line. Now the nice thing about using an engineer's scriber on plastic is the fact that it's not going to scratch or scuff this at all. So there we go. And hopefully you can see a nice, super sharp, accurate line. And we know that is nice and square to the base. So next job is to actually cut this. Now what you'll want to do is you will want to mount this in such a way that if you mount it like that, you'll cut it at an angle. So you just want to make sure it's mounted up so you can cut straight down. I've cut that piece off quite comfortably. I've tied it up with a file and just make sure it's nice and smooth. To make sure it is square, if you grab your engineer's square again and you just run the base along this plane, and what you should find is there's no movement in that at all, and you can't see any light through. You don't have to get it 100%, but you want to get it sort of nearest down it so you couldn't fit much more than a piece of paper down that. What I then did was I got the piece that goes next to it, which is here, and I snipped off this piece, these little sort of extra bits to hold these lugs in place, and using a knife and a file, filed them flat, because the thickness of this plastic here is exactly the same as the thickness of this plastic here. That means what we can do is we can actually take a piece of plasti-card and bind the two together. The plasti-card I'm actually going to use is an old movement tray. So what I've done is I've marked this up, cut it. I've used a knife this time rather than a saw because it's easier to get a straight cut with a nice metal ruler. This is exactly 25mm wide. I used the tile and a pair of compasses to just measure exactly the size this needed to be to fit on the tile correctly. So I'm telling you, it's 25mm. I used this just to gauge, and I've cut out a little lug here and a little lug here so that it will locate like that. And I know, snugged up like this, that will be absolutely perfect. Just put some plastic glue there, glue this in place, and do the same here. Here is one that I've done earlier. What you will see is down this side you actually have a bit of a gap. We will be filling that and probably gluing some extra plasti-card pieces on here, because this is an angle. So when you actually glue this on, you're actually going to have quite a bit of mess. But that's principally how you do it. When you're gluing this piece on, what it's worth doing is to grab something solid and preferably metal, so that when you're lining this up, you know that the base of all of this is going to be perfectly flat. So I'm going to go on and glue these, and you're going to want to, as with everything with plastic glue, you're going to want to leave it probably 12 hours to set properly. All sections are fixed together now. And what I've also done is I've filled down here. Now what I've used is a product called Perfect Plastic Putty by Deluxe Materials. Now this I think is identical to Vallejo plastic putty, just in a bit bigger tube. And the way you use it is you fill this up gradually over time. If you put one big thick layer in, it will take a long time to dry, and it has a risk of sinking, so you'd have to put a second layer in anyway. Once that's done, what I've done is I've used some plastic strip and some plasti-card. Now this also hides any bits where you've overcut it. If I was to do a display piece or spend a bit more time, I'd probably replicate these rivets on this piece of plastic strip as well, but I'm probably not going to for this. What I've also discovered is these are actually a really handy size, because it's basically a column and a wall length. So what you can actually do is, using the other bits from the column, you can actually make one like this. Now this obviously you look at it and go, well, what's the point? This actually is a bit chunkier for your game board, but also what you could do in the same way as for my food shack, you could actually cut out on here, you could cut out both those archways and a cross, and you suddenly got a bigger room. Next thing to tackle is the wall that goes at the back of the room, which is, if you remember, one column and two walls wide. Now originally what I was going to be doing, I was going to think about having an angle along here, replicate this, and then perhaps a piece of wall that goes along here. That I've discarded that as an idea. Firstly, because of the angle of this would make it very difficult to glue anything on, and secondly, because these pieces that I've been lopping off of the columns, I cut too much off it to be able to fit it properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it slightly, and what I'm going to do is a bit like the sides where I glued a piece of plasti-card between the two pieces. I'm going to follow that process again. So I have cut this piece off of here, very similar to how I've done on the sides. However, what I've actually done is I've now glued two of the wall sections together. So these are the pieces that go in the end that normally have got like an extra little T section along the top. I've cut that off and filed it down, and then I've glued these two together perfectly flat. But what I now need to do is I need to basically take about a millimetre and a half off of here and off of here, so that way when these glue together they are going to be the perfect length. Back section's all glued together. You will see there's a very slight bow in there, and that's just where you've got, this is such a thin piece that we've glued onto, it's just flexed a bit. That's fine because that will actually be solved with our next step. I've glued the side panels on, so this is one solid piece now. And what I've done is I've measured between the base here and here, and then from this corner here down to this corner here, so that I know what size to cut my floor out. And here is my floor. This is actually an old piece from a Warhammer modular movement tray, which has got a really nice texture and 20mm squares on one side. It's actually got 25mm on the other. So I've left the corners on because the corners will basically go onto these sections here and at the other side. So I'll do it like that and then just ease it in. Leaving the front off means that you can actually get this piece in much more easily. And so the next step, that has raised this whole panel up. So that means when you put this onto one of your tiles, it will avoid on the vents where you've got these raised location bits for a column, the floor will actually avoid them completely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this, clamp it into place so it's nice and tight, or you can mask and tape it, just something that just holds it really nice and square. And what you can do is you can put some glue, you'll probably want to put glue underneath it, but if you're going to clad the inside like I will plan to, you can actually put glue along the top as well to make sure that's nice and strong. The floor's glued in place. I went in 2 or 3 times with the plastic glue and just topped it up so there's a really nice strong bond there, including going all around the edge from the bottom. What I've also done is I've glued the front panels on. This is just a normal column corner. This is one of the leftover pieces of the wall. If you remember, I used the sides for doing this back section. So I've used this. I've cut the inside of this archway out so that it just casts a little bit more light when you've got it on the tabletop. That was done just with a drill. If you've got a Dremel, it will make it a lot easier, and if you've got a Dremel in a pillar stand, that makes it even easier again. And all I did was I used a drill and basically drilled lots of little holes all the way through, and then just used a knife I pushed it out, cut it round and tied it up with a knife and then with a file. This piece has a bit of an angle on, so what I did was I cut that down with a knife, used a file just to file that flat, and then this piece here, I just cut a couple of notches in there and on the other side, just so it fitted onto the floor nice and tight. It also gave it a little bit more support, the floor a little bit more support. So this will now, because we measured it and made it sure it was all the right size, this will quite happily fit onto any of the vents, nice and secure. And you can also integrate with the rest of your Zone Mortalis terrain. You don't have to secure it onto a vent, but it does need to cover one. So what you could do is you could put a wall section there and so on. So it integrates it with your existing Zone Mortalis terrain really, really nicely. I'm going to call it a day for this video. And what I'll probably do is a part 2 that will also cover how I'm going to deal with this and what I'm going to put inside. What I am going to do is I'm going to clad all these, so I'll put a piece of batten glued against the walls and put textured plasti-card just to give it a bit of thickness and to hide all these inside of the walls that normally wouldn't be on display. I'm also going to make a roof up using various bits of tile that come in the stairs and walkway set. And like I say, I may make this into a bar, or I might make this into a road dock shop. I haven't quite decided on that yet. Hopefully you found this video useful, going through some of the techniques and the tricks that I've got just to make bigger rooms. As I said earlier, you can actually use this principle to make bigger and smaller rooms, just to add a little bit more interest to your Necromunda terrain. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm happy to answer any questions in the comments below or receive feedback on how I can improve future videos. As always, a subscribe and a like are appreciated, and feel free to look me up on Twitter or Instagram. Stay safe